He once dismissed a tractor as motorized agricultural suffering. He'd never operated a combine, never watched a season's work wash away in a single storm. Yet British farmers, people who've spent generations distrusting wealthy outsiders, now speak of him as a kindred spirit, because he accomplished something for British farming that no politician had pulled off in 3 decades. Here are 12 reasons every British farmer has a soft spot for Jeremy Clarkson. Reason 1. He revealed the brutal truth of what farming actually involves. For generations, British farming had an invisibility problem. Not that people were unaware, food came from somewhere. Obviously they knew. But the genuine reality of agricultural life, the crushing physical, financial, and emotional demands of it, remained completely hidden from anyone living outside the countryside. People grabbed their loaves, collected their milk, tossed potatoes into their trolleys without a flicker of thought. And the enormous human effort behind all of it, completely beneath their notice. Then Clarkson's farm arrived, and suddenly millions of viewers were watching a man they already admired, someone they trusted to give it to them straight, stumbling headfirst into that hidden world. They watched crops fail because the weather turned. They watched soil refuse to yield anything useful. They watched him stare across a ruined field of vegetables, trying to figure out where the money was going to come from. And they watched him absorb all of it without falling apart. Farmers had been living that reality their entire lives, but no one had ever put it on screen in a way that made ordinary British people genuinely feel the weight of it. Clarkson managed it. He stripped away any romance or prettiness. He showed the mud, the losses, the endless admin, the heartbreak. And he did it honestly enough that audiences couldn't switch off. For British farmers, that outweighed every government awareness campaign and countryside charity drive combined. He made the nation actually see them. Reason 2. He took on the bureaucratic nightmare farmers have battled for decades. Ask a British farmer what keeps them awake at 3 in the morning, and the weather won't be the first answer. It'll be the paperwork, the forms, the regulations, the inspections, the rules that seem to get rewritten constantly by people who wouldn't recognize a field of barley if they fell into one. British agriculture is among the most heavily regulated industries in the country. Farmers have been quietly sinking under the administrative weight of it for years, filling in endless documentation, chasing grants that take half a year to materialize, navigating systems that appear specifically engineered to obstruct rather than assist. Nobody was talking about this publicly, not in any way that reached beyond the farming community itself. Then Clarkson started talking about it loudly, on primetime television, in front of millions of people. He sat opposite planning officials, council representatives, government figures, and he said, in straightforward language and with unmistakable frustration, exactly what farmers across Britain had been saying to each other in kitchens and farmyards for years, without anyone paying attention. He called it absurd. He called it infuriating. He pointed out, with the particular bluntness that only Clarkson can carry off, that the rulemakers had no real understanding of the practical consequences of what they were imposing. And farmers watching at home, farmers who had spent years feeling like they were shouting at a wall, finally felt like someone was listening. Because Clarkson wasn't muttering about it quietly, he was doing it on the most prominent stage in British television, and the audience was genuinely engaged. Reason 3. He made the public genuinely want to buy British produce. There's a slow-burning crisis that British farmers have been watching develop for years. British produce, food actually grown in British soil by British hands, has been steadily losing ground. Supermarket shelves fill up with cheaper imports. Shoppers reach for whatever costs least without considering the origin. And the farmers who have devoted their lives to growing food on this island have watched their market quietly contract year after year, largely unnoticed. Clarkson noticed, and more importantly, he made his viewers notice. When he started moving produce from diddly squat, the vegetables, the honey, the preserves, the candles, he didn't simply open a farm shop. He transformed buying British into something people actually wanted to participate in. He made it feel like a meaningful act, a small gesture of loyalty towards something genuinely worth preserving. The queues outside his farm shop became famous in their own right. People drove considerable distances. They waited in the rain, they bought jars of honey and bags of potatoes, and felt genuinely pleased about it, because Clarkson had given them a reason to care about provenance, and that effect rippled well beyond his own gates. Farm shops across the country reported stronger footfall. Local markets found new customers asking questions they'd never previously thought to ask. Clarkson didn't just move his own stock. He reminded an entire nation that British farming produces something worth paying for, and that the people doing the growing deserve that support. Reason 4. He put his own money in and lost it publicly. This matters more than it might initially appear. British farming is not a financially rewarding enterprise for most people in it. The typical British farm generates a modest income and in plenty of years generates a loss. Farmers carry that financial pressure without making a song and dance about it, because when the land has been in your family across multiple generations, walking away isn't something you seriously consider. What they rarely receive is solidarity, particularly not from wealthy public figures who could easily absorb the discomfort. Clarkson didn't just describe farming as financially punishing, he proved it by living it. He put serious money in, watched it evaporate, and was transparent about it in a way that was genuinely unusual for someone of his public standing. He didn't conceal poor results behind a polished narrative of eventual success. He acknowledged openly that the farm was draining far more than it was generating, and then he carried on regardless. For farmers watching, that carried genuine weight, because it confirmed what they had always understood, that you don't farm because the spreadsheet tells you to. You farm because it gets into you at a level that rational financial thinking can't reach. Clarkson grasped that, not through being told, but through experiencing it himself. He lost money and returned the following season anyway. In doing so, he demonstrated a quality of respect for what farmers do that no amount of sympathetic narration could have achieved. Reason 5. He handed farming a voice in national debate. British agriculture has a representation problem. It's not that farmers lack views, they have no shortage. The problem is that those views rarely penetrate the conversations that actually determine policy, public perception, and the direction of the industry. The NFU does vital work, but it operates behind closed doors, in corridors and meeting rooms that the general public never sees. And the general public, broadly speaking, doesn't engage with farming policy until something visibly breaks, a shortage, a price spike, an outbreak of disease. Clarkson rewrote that dynamic, because when Clarkson talks about farming, people pay attention. Not because he's an agricultural authority, he'd be the first to admit he isn't, but because he's Jeremy Clarkson, and his reach extends into living rooms across the country. When he raised concerns about government policy hitting small farms, it became news. When he voiced the pressures facing British agriculture, it trended. When he appeared at a farming protest, photographers followed. Almost without intending to, he became the most effective public voice British farming had found in a generation. Not by replacing people with genuine expertise, but by amplifying what they'd been saying in a way that the industry alone had never been able to manage. He got farming onto the front page. For an industry that had spent years being overlooked, that was no small thing. Reason 6. He stood up for the small farm against industrial scale. One of the less discussed stories in British agriculture is the gradual disappearance of the small farm. Large agricultural operations have been absorbing land for decades. Small family farms, the kind woven into the British countryside across generations, are under unrelenting pressure. They can't always match larger competitors on price. They don't always have access to the same grants or subsidies, and they frequently lack the resources to respond quickly when regulations shift or markets move. It's a slow erosion, and it unfolds almost entirely without public comment. Clarkson's farm put a face on it. Diddley Squat is not a large operation. In the real world, it's exactly the kind of farm that would be struggling quietly without anyone beyond the parish noticing. The show made that struggle impossible to ignore. It showed what it actually looks like when a small farm tries to diversify. The planning rejections, the restricted market access, the near impossible arithmetic of making it work at modest scale. And it showed Clarkson refusing to accept defeat, finding unconventional ways to keep the enterprise going. For the thousands of small farming families across Britain watching that unfold, it felt personal, because it was their story, being told by someone whose profile was large enough to make the rest of the country sit up and pay attention. Reason 7. He brought the farming mental health crisis into the light. This is the reason farmers mention when the conversation turns serious. Agriculture carries one of the highest rates of suicide and mental illness of any occupation in Britain. The isolation, the financial strain, the unpredictability, the relentless weight of responsibility for land and livestock and livelihoods, it accumulates in ways the industry has historically been deeply reluctant to discuss. There is a culture of endurance, of not voicing difficulty, of being stoic, because that's what the work demands, and because that's what your father modeled, and his father before him. Clarkson's farm didn't soften that emotional reality. It showed the frustration and the exhaustion. It showed the moments when everything goes wrong, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. The weariness of caring deeply about something the world around you seems entirely indifferent to. And by showing those moments without tidying them up into a redemptive arc, the program gave permission for a conversation that the farming community genuinely needed. Farmers watching recognized what they were seeing, and having those feelings reflected on mainstream television, watched by millions, made them feel considerably less alone with it. It also introduced those feelings to a vast audience that had never previously considered them. And in doing that, it generated a quality of empathy for farming that no formal awareness initiative had quite succeeded in creating. Reason 8. He made farming machinery genuinely exciting to people who'd never cared. This might seem like a lighter entry, but don't dismiss it. Farmers have a deep and sincere relationship with their equipment. Tractors, combines, the specialist machinery that makes the whole operation possible. There's genuine pride in it. It's not merely functional. It's part of farming identity, part of the culture. And for years, that enthusiasm existed entirely within the farming world. Farmers discussed it with other farmers. Agricultural shows drew the faithful. But to anyone outside, a tractor was simply an obstacle on a country lane. Clarkson changed that, because Clarkson is fundamentally someone who becomes genuinely enthusiastic about impressive machines. When he climbed into a Lamborghini tractor, yes, Lamborghini produces tractors, and yes, Clarkson ensured that everyone heard about it, he brought the same energy he'd always directed at supercars. He made agricultural machinery interesting to people who had never given it a moment's consideration. He talked horsepower and engineering capability, and the extraordinary sophistication of modern farm equipment, with the same infectious enthusiasm that had always been his signature. And farmers, who had always known their machines were remarkable, finally got to watch the rest of Britain catch up. Pride matters. Clarkson gave farmers something to be proud of in a way that reached well beyond their own community. Reason 9. He's shown a light on the supermarket pricing problem. Here is a figure that British farmers know by heart and that most British consumers have never thought to question. The price a farmer actually receives for what they produce, milk, wheat, beef, vegetables, is frequently a small fraction of what that item sells for on a supermarket shelf. Sometimes a very small fraction. The gulf between farm gate price and retail price has been a source of deep frustration in the agricultural world for years. Farmers are squeezed from both sides, by rising input costs including fuel and fertilizer, and by the downward price pressure exerted by supermarkets with enormous buying power and minimal obligation to share the margin fairly. It's a structural problem, and one the industry has struggled to communicate in a way that generates genuine anger rather than a vague, passing sympathy. Clarkson addressed it directly, in language his audience could follow and feel. He drew the line between the price on the shelf and the reality in the field. He made it feel like injustice, because it is injustice. And when Clarkson tells millions of viewers that something is wrong, some of those viewers start asking questions. They start reading labels. They start thinking about what the person who grew their food was actually paid for growing it. That shift in awareness is precisely what British farmers have been hoping someone would trigger. Reason 10. He sparked a new generation's interest in the land. British farming has an age crisis. The average British farmer is well past 50. Young people are not entering the industry in meaningful numbers. Agriculture is struggling to attract the next generation, and without it, the long-term future looks genuinely precarious. There are multiple reasons. The work is physically demanding, the financial return is modest, and for young people without a farming background, the culture can feel difficult to access. Clarkson's farm reached a young audience. Not just the farming demographic, but teenagers and people in their 20s, who watched and came away genuinely curious about where food comes from, how land functions, and what it means to actually grow something. Social media buzzed with younger viewers discussing the show, talking about Caleb Cooper, the young farm worker who emerged as one of its most beloved figures, and engaging with the world he represented. Caleb particularly connected with that audience. He was young, funny, and visibly passionate about farming, and he made it look like something worth taking seriously. Clarkson gave him the platform to do that, and in doing so, he planted something in a generation that farming desperately needs on its side. Reason 11. He demonstrated that farming is worth fighting for. There's a particular kind of weariness that takes hold when you've been battling for something over a long stretch and the world continues to look the other way. British farmers know that feeling intimately. They've fought for fair payment. They've fought against regulations written by people with no understanding of how farms actually function. They've fought to preserve their land, their businesses, their way of life. Often quietly, often without allies, often with no sense that anyone beyond the farming community cares either way. Clarkson cared. And he demonstrated it not through sentiment or campaign rhetoric, but through simply doing the work, getting his hands dirty, refusing to walk away when the numbers were against him, coming back each season and continuing to fight for a farm that by any sensible financial reckoning wasn't worth the grief. That stubborn persistence resonated with farmers immediately, because stubbornness is the essential ingredient of farming. It's what keeps people standing after a ruined harvest, after another planning rejection, after another year of falling prices. Clarkson embodied something farmers already carried inside them, but almost never saw reflected back. That the fight is worth having, that the land is worth protecting, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to stop. Reason 12, he made Britain care about its farmers again, and this is perhaps the one that matters above all others. Because every item on this list, the bureaucracy, the pricing, the mental health, the machinery, the small farms, the next generation, every single one of those problems depends ultimately on the same thing: public support. Farmers cannot repair the structural failings of British agriculture working alone. They need consumers who think about what they buy. They need politicians who feel pressure from voters who think about it. They need a media that reflects the importance of farming, because its audience has reason to care. For a long time, that foundation of care was absent, not from any hostility, simply from distance. Most British people live in urban settings with no direct connection to the land or to the people producing their food. Clarkson closed that distance. He took millions of people who had never seriously considered farming and gave them a genuine reason to consider it. He made them laugh first, and then he made them feel something that stuck. He brought them into an unfamiliar world through someone they already trusted, and when each season ended, those viewers took something with them: a new awareness, a new respect, a new habit of pausing, even briefly, to think about where their food originates and who produced it. That is the real gift Jeremy Clarkson gave to British farming. Not a solution, but something rarer and in certain ways more valuable: an audience that finally gave a damn. Jeremy Clarkson came to farming as a complete outsider. He made every imaginable mistake. He lost money, clashed with officials, and left his neighbors baffled. But somewhere in the process, something changed. The man who built his entire reputation on speed and noise found something slower, quieter, and considerably more meaningful, and he brought the rest of Britain along for the ride. British farmers didn't require a celebrity to tell them their work had value, but they received something more useful. They got a witness. Someone who saw what they do, felt the full weight of it, and told the truth about it to anyone prepared to listen. And millions were. If this brought back memories of the British countryside, or if you've got a favorite moment from Clarkson's farming adventures, share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. He once dismissed a tractor as motorized agricultural suffering.